Showers quickly die away actually after the sun goes down in many places, but they'll continue around western shores, perhaps the odd one coming close to the south coast. Then later in the night, the cloud thickens in the west and it turns wet across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. That'll keep temperatures up at 8 or 9 Celsius, dipping to 5 or 6 in the east of England, where at least we do have some sunshine to begin things on Tuesday. And we keep that sunshine for much of the morning, but the cloud thickens elsewhere and spells of rain move across Scotland, Northern England, into parts of Wales. Some light and patchy drizzle further south, but actually it does dry up a little into the afternoon, although a lot of places stay cloudy. There'll be further outbreaks of rain in the northwest of Scotland, and it's going to be a mild day with this strong southwesterly breeze reaching gale force around northern and northwestern shores. Further spells of rain into the northwest of Scotland on Tuesday night, a lot of cloud elsewhere. And this wet weather sticks around for a time, I think, through Wednesday and into Thursday in the northwest, increasingly focused, though, on Cumbria around the mid to latter part of this week. And it's going to be mild everywhere.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour. It's budget week. The Chancellor claims there will be £7 billion on Wednesday for levelling up local transport, but most of it already appears to be existing spending pledges. We'll speak to a former Transport Minister. And are Facebook algorithms designed to evoke negative emotions and make users addicted? We'll bring you the latest from the Facebook whistleblower who's currently live in Parliament and speak to the head of policy at a major social media platform. And are we heading for another cancelled Christmas or a relatively COVID-free winter? Well, the latest modelling seems to suggest we might actually have a positive story to tell. We'll be speaking to the experts to get their view. And as always on the afternoon briefing, we want to hear what you've got to say. Give us your views and opinions by emailing us. You know the address, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Very welcome to the programme. But before we start, let's get all the latest news this afternoon with Amelia Harper. I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 3 o'clock.
The national living wage is set to rise 59 pence to £9.50 an hour from April next year. The Treasury announcement, which is part of the autumn budget, means full-time workers will see their income increase by more than £1,000 a year. The government's also announced £5.9 billion will be made available to help tackle NHS backlogs. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary Sajid Javid says the government is heading towards legislating mandatory COVID vaccines for all NHS staff. A member of the Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation is also urging NHS workers to get double jabbed as a matter of professional pride. The Chief Medical Officer in Wales has warned that draconian COVID restrictions could be reintroduced if COVID cases continue to rise. Dr. Frank Atherton says he's disappointed to see many people have stopped wearing masks and stopped social distancing. The country's coronavirus infection rate is at its highest level since the pandemic began. 3,152 new positive cases were reported on Sunday, with a further 12 deaths. The average UK petrol price has reached an all-time high at 142.94 pence a litre. That's after prices beat records set in 2012 at the weekend by 0.46 pence. Diesel prices reached 146.5 pence a litre. The RAC is calling it a dark day for drivers that will hurt many household budgets. Scotland's First Minister says the COP26 Global Climate Conference in Glasgow could be the last opportunity to avert a climate catastrophe. Nicola Sturgeon says the country is in a unique position to act as a bridge between gaps in the conversation between world leaders. Speaking to school children in Downing Street about the conference, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says meeting the goals of COP26 would be very, very difficult. But he says, I think it can be done.
We need as many people as possible to agree to go to net zero so that they're not producing too much carbon dioxide by the middle of the century. Now, I think it can be done. It's going to be very, very tough, this summit. And I'm very worried because it might go wrong and we might not get the agreements that we need. And it's touch and go.
The ultra-low emission zone is expanding in London from today, now covering a quarter of the capital. Drivers of older petrol or diesel cars will have to pay £12.50 a day to drive into the zone. The Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, has told GB News the scheme will clean up London's toxic air pollution.
Well, the numbers of Londoners in the Eurozone is almost 4 million. That's double the size of Paris, 8 times the size of Manchester, because I think this is an issue where all of Londoners should see the benefits of clean air, not just those lucky to live in central London, as a consequence of our first policy in 2019.
Elsewhere on the roads, 52 people have been arrested after Insulate Britain brought London's financial district to a standstill today. Protesters took to the streets of the City of London and Canary Wharf. Injunctions have already been filed against some protesters after they caused delays on the M25 and other major roads during 5 weeks of action. A spokesperson says they will continue until the government gives a meaningful statement that they can trust. The husband of detained British-Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has gone on hunger strike for the second time in 2 years. Richard Ratcliffe is sleeping outside of the Foreign Office in London after his wife lost her latest appeal for freedom. Ms. Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been held in jail in Iran since 2016, accused of plotting to topple the government. Their daughter Gabriella played a mock-up game of snakes and ladders outside of Parliament to illustrate the challenges of trying to get her mother home. Richard Ratcliffe says he wants to go back to being a normal family.
Probably part of what we wanted to do today was just to say, listen, we've all had a lot of ups and downs in our lives, you know. This is a heck of a long time for this to be dragging on. And of course, you know, over time I've been on the television lots and lots and been on, you know, the newspapers lots and lots. And we'd love to go back to being a normal family. And I still have every faith that one day we will.
We'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Now back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. Thank you for your company on this Monday. Now, our top story today is all about the budget. It is, of course, budget week, with the budget due to be held on Wednesday, though it must be said we've had our fair share of announcements already from the Treasury this week. Big spending commitments, including £5 billion on health, £3 billion on education. But the largest sum so far has actually been for transport, with nearly £7 billion being announced. This comes at a time when opposition to HS2 is not going away. The train is increasingly being framed by opponents as only benefiting those commuting to London. And now the Chancellor says new funding will focus on transport outside of the capital. Much of it will benefit the north, with Greater Manchester to be handed more than £1 billion, according to the Treasury. Well, Andy Burnham, the city's Labour mayor, has called it a breakthrough and a very positive first step. This is what he had to say. He said that the only way I would describe it is we put forward a powerful case for a London-style public transport system from Manchester. This is a big down payment on it. He previously claimed, of course, Manchester was 20 years behind London when it comes to public transport. But the big question is, how much of that £6.9 billion is actually new? We are yet to see the figures, of course, in the detail in the budget, but much of it does appear to have already been announced. £5.7 billion of it is going to come over 5 years from the pre-existing city regional sustainable transport settlements, which, to be fair, seem to have increased from £4.2 billion. So is this Treasury smoke and mirrors, or is it a real attempt to try and level up northern transport? Well, delighted to say that I'm joined now by the former Liberal Democrat Transport Secretary, Norman Baker. Good afternoon to you, Norman. I suppose, first of all, what's your initial impression, thoughts on this rather large sum of money for transport, most of which seems to be designated for outside of London?
Yes, well, £7 billion is a big sum of money for transport, and the fact that we've got an allocation for Manchester of over £1 billion for the West Midlands, £500 million just over for South Yorkshire and so on. And these are real sums of money, will make a big difference. And the Treasury's really shot itself in the foot unnecessarily by pretending it's all new money. If it simply said, we're now putting flesh on the bones as to where the money's going that we previously announced, and here's another £1.5 billion you weren't expecting, it would have been a totally good news story. But by re-announcing it, in this way, they've given themselves a PR headache. I mean, they tend to re-announce money more often than the Muddy Blues reissue Nights and White Satin.
In saying that, Norman, aside from that, we'll get on to the Treasury announcement in a moment, because I think the Speaker is not terribly happy that these announcements are all being made ahead of the budget rather than in Parliament. But we'll come on to the politics in a moment. Just on transport specifically, just remind our viewers who live in different parts of the country just what the big disparities are in terms of transports.
Well, I mean, the North has argued for a very long time that the amount of money per head of population being spent in places like Manchester and Birmingham, which are, after all, very big, important cities, has been a small fraction of that which is spent in London. And that's certainly true. And there's been a succession of schemes in London, for example, Crossrail or the Jubilee line, extensions to the Northern line and whatever it happens to be, which have seen London prosper. And that's because it's the capital. But I think places elsewhere in England have felt left out quite justifiably. And to be fair to the government, they appear to be trying to redress that. So this money will make a big difference. However, the big problem, I think, which is not being talked about is this. Is it's all very well providing bus routes and new rail links and so on, but they have to get passengers onto those forms of transport for them to be successful. And what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years, or even more perhaps, has been continually that bus fares have risen way above inflation, train fares likewise, while the cost of motoring has been kept quite far down. If you look for the last 25-year period, from 1997, 24-year period, over that period we've seen bus fares go up 172% in real terms, rail fares by 127%, and car travel by 58%. So actually it's been an incentive to get in your car. Now, if we're going to tackle climate change and air pollution and congestion, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
In saying that, it must be said the RAC today saying that I think petrol prices are the highest ever in the UK, but you're right in pointing out, over the longer period of time, that difference has not been the big burden on car users. Norman, what about HS2? Where are we at with that? It's all rather confusing. Of course, the Lib Dems won the seat, didn't they? Pretty much on the back of their opposition to HS2, or seeming opposition to HS2 in Amersham. Where are we at in
Yeah.
terms of the line beyond Birmingham up to Manchester, the west and east coasts, and even this talk of a railway line between Liverpool and Hull?
Well, I mean, HS2, of course, was misnamed. People think it's about high speed. It isn't. It's about capacity, and they need to get more trains on the lines north, which the West Coast Main Line's full up. So it gave itself a problem by its name in the first place. Where we are is that the line to Birmingham's going ahead, and the line to the northwest from Birmingham's going ahead, but we haven't yet had a final decision on the eastern leg up towards Sheffield and Leeds. And indeed, the muttering from the Transport Secretary suggests that might be cancelled. But there's an integrated rail review which is going to come between now and Christmas. It won't be in the budget, I don't think, but it'll be between now and Christmas. And that will be decided at that point, along with the fares increase or otherwise for the railways from January. I think if it doesn't go ahead, the HS2 eastern leg, there'll be problems politically for the government because they'll be seen as an attack on levelling up. But they will try to make up for it with other improvements to east-west rail in that area and pretend that's a satisfactory replacement.
Norman, as I say, just before we let you go, let's get on to the politics very briefly. And that, of course, is that we've seen all these announcements, including today, a big increase in the minimum wage, all ahead of the budget. Now, this is actually not very traditional. Normally, the Chancellor sticks to announcing things on budget day. The big question is, do we think he's got anything left to announce on Wednesday?
Well, this kind of selective briefing has got worse and worse over the years. It wasn't very long ago. I mean, well, it was actually. It was about 1950-something, when a Chancellor let slip something in the budget to a journalist just before he went into the House and had to resign as a consequence of that. Now, those days have long gone, and what the government's strategy here is, and it's been getting worse over the last 10 years, has been to selectively get good stories out of the door days in advance of the budget to command good headlines for days and days. There will be something left in the budget to announce. There'll be one or two good stories in the budget to announce, to people by surprise. So there'll be a good story the next day. But the test will be, of course, when the financial journalists read through the small print and find one or two very unpleasant things in the budget which haven't been announced, but are there in page 94, subsection 4.
OK, Norman Baker, always a pleasure having you on the programme. Thank you very much indeed for joining us there, the former, of course, Lib Dem Transport Minister under the coalition government. Now, another big transport story today is that London's pollution charge zone, or ULEZ, is beginning to become 18 times bigger, or it has done, as of today. It's been announced, of course, by the London Mayor Sadiq Khan, and he's been speaking to GB News about why he's felt the need to bring it in.
Well, the numbers of Londoners in the ULEZ zone is almost 4 million. That's double the size of Paris, 8 times the size of Manchester, because I think this is an issue where all of Londoners should see the benefits of clean air, not just those lucky to live in central London as a consequence of our first policy in 2019. The key thing is to address the issue of air pollution. So we're doing a number of things to solve the issue of air pollution. The electrical emission zone is one of them. All our buses are ULEZ compliant, but also we've got a record number of electric buses. We now have record numbers of taxis that are electric. We're also doing things to make sure our buildings don't emit toxicity in relation to emissions and so forth. So we've got to make sure we continue to make progress in relation to the twin challenges of air pollution and climate emergency.
And finally, we've seen Insulate Britain on the streets of London today by Limehouse Causeway. How concerned are you about these protests, and do you think the police are doing enough to stop them?
Well, I'm concerned about some of the tactics used by these protesters. They're unlawful, they're dangerous, and they're often not peaceful as well. It's really important for those who feel strongly about this. I feel strongly about this. I feel strongly about the climate emergency and air pollution, to take people with us. And what these protesters are doing is not only risking their own safety, risking the safety of others, but driving people away from an important issue. The police have made a number of arrests today. They'll continue to do so where people break the law.
That was the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, speaking to Alice Porter a little bit earlier. We're going to take a quick break here on The Briefing. Up next, we're going to be looking at COVID. What is the future going to hold? Are we looking at Plan B, or potentially all the modelling suggesting that might not be necessary? Also, we'll be going to the Commons, where both Facebook and Brexit are under scrutiny. But before all that, let's bring you up to date with the weather. Stay tuned. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Hello again. Don't be fooled if you get a bit of sunshine this afternoon. There are some lively showers out there. They'll move along quickly, but some of them will be heavy with hail and thunder, particularly across northern parts of the UK, closest to this area of low pressure. This weather front has now cleared and we're into this unstable westerly airflow. But the isobar is fairly tightly packed together, so that means it will be breezy, especially in the north. And that breeze helping to carry the showers through. Into the evening, the showers ease away across central and eastern parts of the country. There'll be further showers in the west for a time, but eventually the cloud thickens in the west and we'll see some more prolonged rain set in across Northern Ireland and western Scotland. That will give the temperatures a lift in the northwest, but it will be a chilly, albeit bright start to the day across the Midlands. East Anglia, southeast England, perhaps northeast Scotland as well. Touch of grass frost possible in the southeast, even the odd mist patch. Soon enough, the mist will lift because the breeze will pick up. That breeze sends the cloud in across much of the UK. A spell of rain, first thing, across northern parts of the country. That moves through. Then many places drier and brighter into the afternoon, but a lot of cloud and an increasing wind. But it will be mild, 16 or 17 Celsius in the south, 12 Celsius further north. But it's in the northwest where the wind will be particularly strong. Gales around northern and western coasts of Scotland, the wind also bouncing over the hills of the north. And then this spell of rain in the northwest pushing its way south through the night. And so by dawn it's wet across parts of the central belt, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and Cumbria. It does dry up, though, in the far north, and it's a dry night across southern parts of the UK. But it's a very mild night everywhere, so not a cold start by any means on Wednesday. However, it will be a wet start for much of northern England, southwest Scotland, North Wales. That rainfall persistent across Cumbria and southwest Scotland in particular. Risk of localised flooding here. The rain pushes south on Thursday and Friday.
Hi, I'm Alistair Stewart, and I really hope that you can join me here on GB News. I've been in this game for 40 years and I've made lots of friends, and I try and reflect what they think about the big stories of the day in conversation with me. That's why we call it Alistair Stewart and Friends, and you're a key part of it as well. I always get inundated with emails and messages and texts, and if they're really good, I play them back to you. 12 till 3 every Saturday and Sunday.
Very welcome back. Now, the second biggest spending commitment that we're going to see in the budget this week seems to be for the National Health Service, more specifically, of course, for tackling England's record waiting list. Now, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, is about to announce, we think, £6 billion in the budget for that. It's claimed that the cash will help deliver around 30% more elective activity by 2024-25 compared to pre-pandemic levels. It could also mean that millions more checks, scans, procedures for non-emergency patients could be carried out. But will the cash really change anything, or does the NHS itself need to be changed? Joining me now is Richard Slockett. He's the former Special Advisor at the Department of Health and Social Care, and also the founder and Programme Director of Future Health. Good afternoon to you, Richard. First of all, health has been clearly, obviously, at the centrepiece of government policy for the last year and a half. It will have to continue to be so. Digging ourselves out of those waiting lists is going to take a long time.
Yeah, hi Darren. I think it is going to take a long time, and Sajid Javid was out this morning saying that the waiting list could go as high as 13 million over the coming years in light of the restrictions that we've seen in using the NHS through the pandemic. So this needs some long-term investment. This new investment, which is in buildings and technology, is welcome, and I think will get patients seen much faster, which for the government, which is looking ahead to an election in 2024, is really, really critical.
In saying that, Richard, people have been pointing out, you're right, lots of this is infrastructure spending, but ultimately we don't just need kind of new operating theatres and wards, also need lots more staff potentially, or staff that look like they may well have a pay rise as well.
So we definitely do need more staff. I think there's something like 80,000 vacancies across the NHS at the moment. And when you look at the impact that the pandemic has had on the health and well-being of staff, many staff are burnt out having worked through the pandemic, then that is a major restriction on the ability to do the number of operations that the government wants and needs to do. So yes, there is going to have to be more money for staff, and then retaining staff is going to be so critical. And one aspect of that, as you say, Darren, is pay. And with inflation in the economy rising, it's important that pay is looked at as an ability to make sure that we retain those staff within the service so that actually patients can get seen as quickly as possible.
Richard, I read a piece yesterday in the Sunday Times by Matthew Said talking about how money isn't going to be simply the answer to all of this, that we need to reassess the National Health Service, be maybe more open to criticising it. Do you think that's fair? And do you think actually somewhat kind of counterintuitively, the Conservative Party seems to be in a place where even they find it quite critical or quite difficult, to be critical of the National Health Service and the way it's run?
So I think what we've seen over the last 18 months is the NHS as part of our sort of national religion. Its popularity has always been very high, but I think over the last 18 months, its popularity has gone up even more as a result of the pandemic and the support that the public gave it by staying at home, and the clapping that we all did, Darren, I think was really sort of emblematic of that. However, we shouldn't, as Matthew Said's piece did say, we shouldn't avoid the fact that our health service faces some real challenges. And, we have a sort of rising elderly population. We have more complicated care that needs to be delivered. We have one route that we use to finance the health service, which is taxation, and more money is obviously part of that solution. But we do need to look at how we can deliver sort of better preventative care so people are seen earlier and their conditions don't deteriorate more, as part of a strategy that actually tries to make the service more sustainable for the future. And one answer to that, which is part of this package today, is technology. And I think technology is a really important enabler for some of that change. I mean, I think we've all been in different interactions with the health service over the years where we've had to repeat the information we've given to different bits of the system, or bits of the system are not joined up and connected. And the hope here is that some investment in new technology can help us actually make the flow of the system better and to drive some much needed efficiency within it.
Okay, Richard, as always, thank you very much indeed for your time and your thoughts. Richard Slockett there, who is the founder and Programme Director of Future Health. Now, let's stay with health news, move away from public spending, move on to what may well happen with restrictions in the weeks to come. Could we see the introduction of so-called Plan B measures, or potentially could, as some models seem to suggest, the cases could fall rapidly this winter. Well, delighted to say that we're going to be joined, indeed, at the moment, by Dr. Charles Levinson, who is the Chief Executive of the private health care service called Doctor. Charles, very good afternoon to you. What's your thoughts on this? Clearly, cases are quite high at the moment, dangerously high, some are suggesting.
Dan, hello. Yeah, it's Charles Levinson of Doctor Call. Just to clarify that. So the cases are quite high. They're not as high as Neil Ferguson thought they would be. They're only about half of where he thought they'd get to when he modelled the effects of the reduced restrictions which we've got. And they're falling, and they are expected to keep falling, and probably to get down to a tenth of where they are now by Christmas, which is extremely good news.
Why do we think that, though? I don't understand. I mean, we criticise one model and say they're wrong on that, and then we say, oh, the other model's right. Do we just choose the model that we think best fits what we want to happen?
I think one has to pity these epidemiologists who have been busy modelling for years and no one's really noticed. And now they're held to account because governments have no choice but to follow scientific advice that they get. So it is clearly a difficult thing, but we are seeing a fall in cases. And we have to remember that COVID is a cousin of the common cold. The common cold is a COVID virus, and the common cold killed huge numbers of people when Europeans first went to the Americas because it was a COVID virus that was new to them, and of course, so they didn't have any immunity. And immunity is building up, and that is what is thought to be the cause for the fall in cases that we're seeing.
Clearly, the big cause that the government have been focusing on in all of this is not necessarily cases, it's the pressure on the National Health Service. And the argument is that clearly with more cases, it means that more people will end up in hospital, even if it's not quite the numbers that we saw at the start of this year, but potentially with the flu season as well. Medics and the National Health Service itself simply cannot cope. And that is why we need to take more preventative measures now to stop things potentially toppling over in the winter.
I think before any preventative measures are introduced, what has to be remembered is that we have seen huge unintended consequences of restrictions. And they're not just the inconvenience and discomfort of wearing masks and so on, but we've seen a huge rise in other types of illness. And there's been evidence is that lots and lots of cancer cases have been missed, lots of cardiovascular disease cases have been missed, and we seem to be at the beginning of a big rise in mental health issues. And we've seen it's a difficult ship to steer. Once the people are warned that it's dangerous and they should be frightened of it, it's very hard to get them to behave normally again. And we've at Dr. Call, we've had recently a case of a chap who had a heart attack and wouldn't go to hospital because he was afraid of catching COVID, which is clearly a much smaller risk, but he had it out of proportion. And I think that the doctors are believing their own story, and this is one of the reasons that we're having so much trouble getting doctors to do face-to-face consultations. So the consequences of bringing in Plan B and are huge, and it shouldn't be done lightly.
OK, really appreciate your time. Dr. Charles Levinson there from Dr. Call joining us down the line. OK, we're going to pause here on the briefing on GB News. Let's bring you up to date with the time just after 3:30 this afternoon with the very latest news and Amelia Harper.
I'm Amelia Harper. Here are your latest headlines. The national living wage is set to rise 59 pence to £9.50 an hour from April next year. The Treasury announcement, which is part of the autumn budget, means full-time workers will see their income increase by more than £1,000 a year. The government has also announced £5.9 billion will be made available to help tackle NHS backlogs. Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen has told a parliamentary committee that the social media giant was unquestionably making online hate worse. Ms Haugen is giving evidence to the Joint Committee for the draft online safety bill as part of government plans for social media regulation. The average UK petrol price has reached an all-time high at 142.94 pence a litre. Diesel prices reached 146.5 pence a litre. The RAC is calling it a dark day for drivers that will hurt many household budgets. Elsewhere, Scotland's First Minister says the COP26 Global Climate Conference in Glasgow could be the last opportunity to avert a climate catastrophe. Nicola Sturgeon says Scotland's in a unique position to bridge the gaps in conversation. At Downing Street, the Prime Minister has been speaking to school children about the climate conference. Boris Johnson says meeting the goals of COP26 would be very, very difficult, but he says he thinks it can be done. 52 people have been arrested after Insulate Britain brought London's financial district to a standstill today. Protesters disrupted rush-hour traffic in the City of London and Canary Wharf. Injunctions have already been filed against some protesters after they caused delays on the M25 and other major roads during 5 weeks of action. Those are your latest headlines. We'll have a full update for you at the top of the hour.
Very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. Time coming up to 20 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Monday afternoon. Now, Lord Frost, of course, the Minister in charge of post-Brexit arrangements, is in Parliament this afternoon, facing questions from MPs from the Foreign European Committee in Parliament. Questions, of course, about the Northern Ireland Protocol, fishing, many other issues. Let's just dip in and have a listen to how that select committee is going.
From British domestic legal purposes, an override of both the withdrawal agreement and the protocol, were it necessary to use it by way of further primary legislation. Would that not be correct?
So I think it has always been the case, and Section 38 makes it abundantly clear that this Parliament can make or unmake any law within the United Kingdom, and that is clear, and that fact has consequences.
And one last point on this, which is that, in fact, I had a letter in the Times only a few days ago in which I made clear that, quoting Lord Bingham, one of our greatest judges, that this would be the case in terms of providing for parliamentary sovereignty in respect of all matters, including even if it was in respect of the rule of law, so that, as far as he was concerned, the whole question of parliamentary sovereignty comes first, as you just described. Thank you very much indeed. David Jones, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if I could just press Lord Frost slightly on one of the answers he gave you. And you'll be aware, Lord Frost, that there was a report in the Times last week suggesting that the government might be softening its position on the role of the European Court of Justice by allowing it some sort of vestigial interpretive role. The following day, there was an article in the Telegraph which said that that was effectively a load of nonsense. Was it a load of nonsense?
So there's all kinds of speculation around our position, and there has been for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, we've tried to make it clear, and the position in the command paper is authoritative, that we can't have the Court of Justice settling disputes between us in this protocol in future. And as I said, we're not interested in the court sort of by another name or by another route. It must be, I think the principle, probably most important principle, is that it's one of equality. That's what we put into the TCA, two equal sovereign entities with an equal arbitration mechanism that settles disputes fairly between the two parties, and that seems to us the best way forward in this case as well.
No role whatever for the European Court of Justice?
So no role for the court as the final arbiter of disputes, as the summit of the system that imposes EU law. No role for the direct settlement of disputes between us, yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about the Act of Union 1800. This, of course, may be sub judice to a certain extent, so I'd like to skirt around that if at all possible. But what is your assessment of arguments that the protocol conflicts with UK domestic law in the shape of Article 6 of the Act of Union, which of course does provide for unfettered trade in both directions between Great Britain and Ireland, or Northern Ireland now?
So, as you say, this is a matter that's sub judice, I think, and I think court proceedings in the Court of Appeal are imminent or relatively imminent on that. So I don't want to say anything that would get in the way of that, and I don't think it'd be right to do so. Our position, having said that, has been that the protocol is compatible with the Act of Union, and we've set out arguments for that in the court case so far, and that is probably about as far as I'd better go without getting into arguments that are better settled in the court.
And of course, the Article 6 of the Act of Union not only provides for unfettered mutual trade, but also provides that in all treaties with any foreign power, His Majesty's subjects of Ireland shall have the same privileges and be on the same footing as His Majesty's subjects of Great Britain. That presumably is a matter that you're very well aware of.
Indeed, and as I say, the arguments are set out, and I probably best not go into them here, but you're correct in what you say.
Thank you.
Richard Drax, please.
Well, good afternoon, nice to see you. Aside from dispute resolution, how satisfied are you with the proposal?
There you go. That was Lord Frost, of course, speaking to the European Affairs Scrutiny Committee. Bill Cash there, the chairman of that committee, along with David Jones, of course, a former Brexit minister, actually, under Theresa May. Lots of questions, particularly there, it seemed, about the Northern Ireland Protocol, the role that the European Court of Justice plays in the implementation of that protocol in Northern Ireland. And we know the discussions between Lord Frost and his European counterparts are due to resume tomorrow on this very issue. And we'll of course, keep you up to date in the weeks to come, see how those talks play out. It is expected that they will play well into November. They're said to be quite positive at the moment, but suggestions there, of course, from Lord Frost that the red line is that they do not want to see the ECJ play a role in all of this. Right, OK, let's move away from Brexit and let's move on to what is going to be a big story also in the coming weeks. That, of course, is the COP26 summit, which is due to start in Glasgow. It is preparing to welcome to 30,000 people for the UN Climate Change Conference. However, support for the summit in the city appears to be dwindling, as Glaswegians are facing huge disruptions to everyday life, including particularly to transport, with commuters being warned the city will face an unprecedented impact on the transport network. We're going to be speaking to a guest, Brian Moncrief, about this in a couple of minutes. But first, let's get this report from Davy Donaldson, who is in Scotland and has got the latest on the preparations for COP, which is due to start this coming Sunday.
Preparations well underway for COP26 at the SECC in Glasgow. But Police Scotland have also been preparing to manage the event, with 25,000 delegates arriving in the city. They're also bracing themselves for the arrival of hundreds of thousands of protesters from across the UK.
You know, this is not going to be 14 days of non-protest, but we're a democracy. Peaceful protest is a sign of a strong democracy. Part of our policing plan is to facilitate that protest to the point where it begins to either potentially threaten or pose risk to others, impact so significantly on the conference, or impact so significantly on the communities that we have to step in and take a far more robust and proactive approach to it.
The police operation has been in planning for almost 2 years and will see officers arriving from across the UK. But the force has also been actively speaking to groups like Extinction Rebellion and Greenpeace.
In terms of the actual negotiation, we have been deployed police liaison officers to deal with individuals and groups for a number of months. Recently, myself and my Silver Commander had a Teams meeting with 4 prominent members of Extinction Rebellion, one lady based in Scotland, 3 chaps based in England. And it was a really useful engagement because we were really upfront. You know, part of our policing strategy is to have a no-surprise approach. So I explained in detail, supported by my Silver Commander, about what the policing approach is in Scotland, how that we are happy to facilitate peaceful protest, but if you get to the point where your actions are now presenting a risk to others or negatively and significantly impacting on the business of conference, then you can expect us to be more robust.
World leaders and members of the royal family will also be in attendance, raising the threat of terrorism.
You talked about protesters. Have you prepared for a terrorism attack?
We've prepared for the full range of threats and risks to the event, including obviously terrorist attacks down to lower level protests. So we have the contingencies in place and we have the capabilities in place to deal with a full range of threats. Hopefully that won't happen, but if they do, we're ready and prepared to respond to them.
The COP26 conference gets underway in Glasgow on the 31st of October and lasts until the 12th of November.
Well, delighted to say that we're now joined by the former Conservative MSP and columnist for The Scotsman, Brian Monteith. Thank you very much indeed, Brian, for joining us. I suppose, first of all, let's focus on the logistics of this. It is a massive event, 30,000 people coming to Glasgow. Do you get a sense, though, that the Scottish Government and maybe the local authorities slightly caught on the hop on this?
Well, this is a great challenge, and whilst civic pride, national pride, suggests that we'd want it to work out fine and be a great success in the making, one has to say it is going to be like having an Old Firm match every day of the week for about 12 days. That's going to put a huge pressure on the logistics of the police, on the transport, on the cleansing authorities, on the health service, the risks from COVID being spread. So let's not kid ourselves. This is a really big logistical problem for Glasgow and for the UK.
A big logistical problem, but also a big potential political opportunity, it must be said. The question is who for? Clearly, as always with these things, Nicola Sturgeon will want to claim some credit. But for Boris Johnson, this is potentially a career-defining moment, isn't it?
Well, that rather depends if you believe that summits of leaders actually achieved anything. I have my doubts. I think what we're seeing here is the gathering of lots of people who were not that long ago meeting in Cornwall. What did that achieve? We might beg to question that. There's going to be a lot of hot air. There's going to be a lot of CO2 expended in people getting there. 30,000 delegates descending on Glasgow. Well, if there's a political opportunity, the way these things go is that they're normally addressed before they get there. They then sign up to what has already been agreed, shake hands and do the photo calls. Do we really need this to solve the problems they're talking about? Again, I have my doubts. I'm not convinced about big junkets like this as being what changes things for people's lives.
And just very finally, Brian, and quickly if you can, I suppose the question is, what is, and you're right to point on, what is success like? Because it's quite difficult to discern. We get all these announcements about countries saying they're going to be carbon neutral by 2040, 2050, 2060. Have you got a sense of what success would actually look like for COP26?
Well, even if we just take Scotland, where Nicola Sturgeon today has said that Scotland can bridge the gap between small and large countries. The truth is, someone like Nicola Sturgeon has to mind the gap of credibility, where political leaders such as herself have not met, for instance, emissions targets for the last 3 years, that have not delivered the 130,000 green jobs that she promised, that sees all the steel being exported out of Scotland for recycling rather than dealt with in Scotland itself. So there's a lot of hot air from politicians, and that's why the targets are just never met.
OK, Brian, appreciate your time. We'll, of course, have full coverage of COP26 starting this Sunday here on GB News. Brian Monteith there joining us from Lincolnshire, but he is a columnist at The Scotsman. Let's focus now on Facebook, because a whistleblower has been given evidence to MPs at Parliament's Digital, Cultural and Sports Committee this afternoon. It comes amid new revelations about the company's inner workings and a series of potentially damaging leaks. And lots of people have been suggesting that Facebook has been taking thousands of documents, that the whistleblower has been taking thousands of documents with her, providing them to the Wall Street Journal. And the testimony has stirred up debates both in the US and here in Britain about the platform's almost monopoly status, its power and its accountability. The issues of data collection, privacy and transparency, as well as free speech online, have been coming up amongst those MPs who've been questioning her. Well, I'm delighted to say that Amy Peckhoff, who is a philosopher, lecturer and the head of policy at the social media platform Parler, joins us down the line from the United States. Very good afternoon, or good morning, I should say, to you, Amy.
Yes, here
first of
in
all,
Texas.
Indeed, in Texas, very nice. What did you make of the testimony that we've heard actually last week in the United States and indeed here in the UK today?
So what I've seen in the testimony, some of it actually does raise real issues. The starkest issue for me really is the algorithms, Facebook's engagement enhancing algorithms, which the Haugen testimony and materials seem to say are real, that they're not just some rumor that was on the documentary that appeared recently. So those algorithms to me raise a question of whether you can consent to an algorithm that manipulates you in that way, especially when we're talking about young children. That's been a big focus here in the US, is the effect of these algorithms on young children. But with respect to anybody, if an algorithm is powerful enough, you have to start to wonder about whether there's been true consent. The other issues that are being discussed right now, so-called hate speech and other terrorist content, of course it's the case that any social media platform should do its utmost to remove all illegal content. And illegal content would be any incitement to violence, a lot of this so-called terrorist material, but terrorism is a label that's thrown around a lot these days. You want to look to whether there's threats, whether there's incitement to violence. Those things should be removed, of course.
Sorry, just to interrupt there. I mean, obviously Facebook and others have always defended themselves as platforms, and they would argue, and some others would argue, they're simply reflecting society back at itself.
But see, they're not just doing that, right? So we've had proof now of these engagement enhancing algorithms and how they operate. In one document in particular, they talk about a particular case study of a fictitious user who goes onto Facebook and discovers that even when she does not engage with so-called extremist content, as they put it, she ends up being fed more and more of increasing sort of extremity, if that would be the word. I don't like the word extremism, but I'm using it here. But the point is that these algorithms are not just giving a purely chronological feed of things that the individual user has asked for. And really, I think that the way forward, if we're going to handle this and not institute any sort of big brother, is to give people an algorithm where they can control, the individual controls what they see online. But we're not getting that at Facebook. What we're getting at Facebook is an engagement enhancing algorithm that people don't even really understand what it's giving them and what its relation is to what they've actually signed up for.
Amy, really sorry about this. We're very short in time. So in about 30 seconds, can you tell us what you think needs to change, essentially?
Yeah, what I think needs to change is probably a lawsuit about these algorithms to learn more about them and whether people are being defrauded. I do not think that government regulation is the way forward, because if government regulation controls the content or the algorithmic manipulation of these platforms, that's a recipe for Big Brother.
Amy Peckhoff from Parler, which is also another social media company, and we'll get you on again to talk about that. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. OK, that is it from me for today. Of course, the briefing is back tomorrow with Tom Harwood at 9 a.m, with Gloria at midday, and back at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. But coming up next, we're going to join Alex Phillips with the afternoon agenda. Stay tuned for that. Here is the weather, though, with the Met Office in Exeter on this Monday afternoon. See you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Hello again. Don't be fooled if you get a bit of sunshine this afternoon. There are some lively showers out there. They'll move along quickly, but some of them will be heavy with hail and thunder, particularly across northern parts of the UK, closest to this area of low pressure. This weather front has now cleared and we're into this unstable westerly airflow. But the isobar's fairly tightly packed together, so that means it will be breezy, especially in the north. And that breeze helping to carry the showers through into the evening. The showers ease away across central and eastern parts of the country. There'll be further showers in the west for a time, but eventually the cloud thickens in the west and we'll see some more prolonged rain set in across Northern Ireland and western Scotland. That will give the temperatures a lift in the northwest, but it will be a chilly, albeit bright start to the day across the Midlands, East Anglia, southeast England, perhaps northeast Scotland as well. Touch of grass frost possible in the southeast, even the odd mist patch. Soon enough, the mist will lift because the breeze will pick up. That breeze sends the cloud in across much of the UK. A spell of rain, first thing, across northern parts of the country. That moves through. Then many places